Hello, everyone. My name is Janine Young. I'm your host today. Welcome to COVID Saves Paths weekly webinar. This week's topic is digital contact tracing, the hype and the reality. And we have a very special guest for you this week, Mr. Tomas Puello, who is the author of Hammer on the Dance, which is a series of coronavirus.
I think we lost Janine there, but hello, everyone. This is Ramesh Raskar, professor at MIT Media Lab. And today we'll be talking about how to augment manual contact tracing with citizen-facing apps and through our PathCheck Foundation, and also some new ideas about Wi-Fi and machine learning. So as you know, SafePaths platform has two parts, the SafePaths app as well as the dashboard. And the app is about exposure notification, personalized guidance, and so on. And the dashboard is for public health and businesses for improving conversations with infected and exposed people, predicting hotspots, and so on. And then in that sense, the platform is agnostic to the proximity technology and APIs. We support GPS and Bluetooth and so on. And at the same time, it has to be privacy preserving in every possible way. The third invisible component is the server, but we won't talk about that today. So the PathCheck Foundation is providing the mobile app, the server, and the dashboard is the largest, as far as you know, the largest nonprofit open source for COVID-19 code. The key idea here is that we're creating a modular design that allows you to pick and choose your proximity APIs and GPS. So unlike certain teams that are coming up with open source code bases that just provide one specific thing, maybe it's a GPS solution, maybe it's a Google Apple solution, maybe it's a QR code-based solution, and so on. Our goal is to create a modular framework so that all the code is in one specific place. And depending on what you want, if you want iOS or Android, you want Apple Google exposure notification or GPS, you can just choose the flags at compile time and create the product that you want. So our code base supports, a collection of techniques. Of course, it's React Native, so it can be compiled to iOS and Android simultaneously. It has all the proximity APIs, and new ones are being added all the time. Of course, the Google Apple exposure, other Bluetooth APIs, Bluetooth beacons, GPS, Wi-Fi, QR code, and so on. And it has a whole set of features, not just features for exposure notification or symptom checking, but testing sites, info, COVID test confirmations. And we have partnerships with many data sources as well, so that can be streamed in. And we continue to work with our partners for external API integration as well, such as testing labs, verifiable credentials, and so on. And we hope that whether you use our own flagship solution or we help you launch your solution, there'll be very minimal customization you will have to do. But again, the important here is that we want to have hundreds of apps out there, not our app, but hundreds of apps out there, as long as they benefit from our code base. So PathCheck's goal is to help countries and nations and states and employers build their own custom solutions that are open source, privacy first, and interoperable. We already have the preview version of the GPS-based solution, and very soon you will see a Bluetooth, Google Apple Bluetooth solution available as well. And very soon after that, you'll see a whole bunch of public health solutions that we're launching. And most of them are already available in our GitHub code base, but we will do pilots and deploy them in a very careful manner. And so Bluetooth solution is called Project Aurora internally. And it has the things that you would expect, exposure notification, risk calculators, but it has many other things that we think are magical because they interface with existing manual contact tracing operations or other public health entities. And this what we think is extremely magical. Because when you think about an individual's experience through a COVID-19 diagnosis or exposure or just awareness, it starts with exposure notification, then there's contact tracing, Then there's ability for public health and individual to talk to each other, do a triage, whether they should go for a test or isolate or ignore, or they should go for a telehealth. Once they have telehealth, if their test is positive or negative, what they should do, how you should monitor those individuals at home. When they have finished their 14 days of quarantine, is it safe for them to return to work or school? And what should public health do as you close the loop? So there are many things that go on to really manage COVID-19 from a software point of view. And of course, if this was a software company, they would just deploy the solution and you would be done. The reason why this is so complicated is because we want to do this with a privacy preserving solution at every stage without slipping into a surveillance state, which means that no name, no email address, no phone number, no home address, and so on. And we still be able to provide this solution end to end. And that's really the magic of PathCheck. Now, there's a lot of debate between should a given jurisdiction set up manual contact tracing or should they adopt digital contact tracing? And those are very polarizing conversations because some people say, no, what? It's just about traditional manual contact tracing. And some people say, we don't really need that. Let's just deploy technology and somehow technology can solve everything. We think it's the fusion of the two. And today's session is mainly about how PathCheck combines both. Just to be sure, in manual contact tracing, there are three main parts. When you have a call center, when you have CRM, there are three things they do. One is that when the infected person comes in, as quickly as possible, they have to identify the contacts who could potentially have been exposed. That's step number one. Step number two is they have to talk to this exposed person, interview them, what were they doing? Were they very intimate? Were they very close to the infected person? Were they wearing masks? Were they maintaining social distance at that point? And so on. And third is you have to make a decision whether they go for a test or they isolate or they don't have symptoms, but you have to call them every day if you're running this call center to monitor this individual for 14 days to see if the symptoms are changing or not, and whether they need support in terms of mental health or food or medicine, which should be delivered to their house. And if there are other people in the same household, should you monitor them as well? So that's essentially how manual contact tracing works. Identify, understand context, and monitor. Digital contact tracing, on the other hand, assumes that the responsibility is with the individual. So an individual has a smartphone, they get an exposure saying you may have been exposed, and then the individual has to go to step 2 and do a self-assessment, whether they're over 65 or immunocompromised, they might have some symptoms. So they have to do some kind of a immediate test, self-assessment to decide whether they should go for testing or should they just isolate for now, or should they just ignore it? Of course, the concern is that a lot of people just ignore it, but that comes later. That discussion comes later. And the third is digital contact tracing, which is missing right now, is how do you self-monitor over 14 days? And if the symptoms worsen, how do you come in contact with public health? So what PathCheck is doing through SafePaths is not taking one or the second approach, but creating hooks with public health so that the population that is being monitored and the public health can talk to each other and be in touch in the most efficient way. And this conversation boils down to efficacy versus privacy. And the people who believe in manual contact tracing will say, it's so efficient. We have been doing it since the Spanish flu. We did this in Ebola. And they'll throw at you all these fancy statistics and experiences and say, this is the most efficient method. And the people on the digital contact tracing side will say, no, that's not very efficient because you are going to spend days contacting those exposed individuals. On top of that, there's a serious privacy challenge because if you think about a city like New York, 200,000 people have been infected. And if you take even factor of 10, the number of people exposed by then about 2 million people are in the case management system and their privacy is going for a toss because the government knows everything about them. And it's not clear if there is a risk of a data breach and so on. Then again, this empathy versus automation. The pro for manual contact tracing is that there's so much empathy. When a human being calls you and says, hey, let's sit down and I have some news for you. You know what? You may have been exposed because we have an infected person who claims they're very close to you. Hearing that from individual from a public health is so much more meaningful than an automated system that in the middle of the day say, hey, you may have been exposed. I think the human element is completely missing in the digital solutions. At the same time, the proponents of the digital solution says, yes, we can't give you empathy through a smartphone app, but we can give you automation. In matter of seconds, in matter of minutes, we can do this end-to-end automation to do that. So there are these debates about efficacy versus privacy, empathy versus automation. And what PathCheck is doing is not picking any one particular religion, any one particular narrow viewpoint, and coming up with a solution that possibly achieves all four of these goals. So in that sense, PathCheck is delivering solutions for citizens, for government and public health, and also for employers. And for government and public health, we have the world, from what we understand, world's largest nonprofit open source code base with dashboards, with servers. But most important, we are working with public health to see how we can support their public health efforts. And if they do have manual contact tracing operations, how can we augment them? And for employers, back to work apps. So we're very delighted. We have a fantastic alliance that's growing every day. Of course, it involves MIT faculty, and our work is shaped by conversations with WHO, NHHS, and Mayo Clinic, and others. And the foundation, PathCheck Foundation, which is bringing you this webinar, also has a fantastic team that's working nonstop. And we have hired a very strong software engineering team that's producing, all the software that you see on the GitHub in real time. If you're interested in joining our alliance, please send us a message, whether you're a nonprofit or a for-profit, you believe in the think tank aspect of it, we believe the software aspect of it, whether you want to develop the solutions for yourself or your solution provider, you want to participate, please send us an email if you want to be part of an alliance, because the alliance meets in more intimate settings to share the learnings and talk to each other. And it's not just about privacy, it's about regulation and trade secrets and national security, as well as incentives. So when we say it's privacy preserving, we really mean all these 5 things. And we saw the flow for individuals, but when you think about the flow for businesses, there are very similar problems. How do you monitor people at entrances? How do you schedule meetings? What do you do if one of them is infected, and so on? And so PathCheck really thinks through with our partners and alliance members for all of these operations. And many of the stakeholders, public health, government, businesses, schools, the public, the healthcare, the insurance, the testing labs and workers, there's a very deep conversation going on at PathCheck, and we are piloting and building solutions for many of these partners. In addition, at MIT, we also write a lot of algorithms and papers on these ideas. How to use Bluetooth, how to use Wi-Fi, how to use GPS in a privacy-preserving way. How can you use Bluetooth more than just for exposure notification to do multi-hop analysis or bidirectional trust? So not just contact tracing in the forward direction, but also in the backward direction. We also write a lot of papers about how can you use machine learning in a privacy-preserving way for COVID-19 problems. So if you're a researcher, if you like statistics, if you're an epidemiologist, please come and work with us. We make these versions available as soon as that we are writing in public domain on our GitHub website. So please send us an email if you would like to join our intellectual brain trust as well and work with us. A good example is, although the current Bluetooth protocol from Apple and Google doesn't allow you to add GPS, we are already having conversations with these companies and others that if we do allow GPS, how can we allow that in a privacy preserving way? So please come and take a look. So in that sense, they're making our platform, our PathCheck platform, future proof, because as the ecosystem changes and new features start appearing, we are ahead of the game by a month or 2 or even a year in many cases, so that we are ready with all those modules. And that's why we don't like to fragment the code base into, hey, here's a GPS solution, go to this GitHub. Hey, here's a Bluetooth solution, go to this other GitHub. That's not the point. We want to create a framework so you can make a decision literally at the compile time, what you want and what you don't want in your solution. And we're thinking ahead and building all those modules that you might need as we deal with this shifting ecosystem. When it comes to Wi-Fi, for example, for privacy preserving co-location, there are 2 ways to think about it. It's either top down, which is the access points, MAC addresses can be used, or it can be bottom up, which is the school, the workplace, or the mall doesn't have to worry about maintaining a system, but the smartphones can use the MAC addresses from those AP points. So please look at our papers, and if you're interested in this space, please come and talk to us. What about machine learning and AI? It always comes in conflict because data is the engine for AI, and AI is very data hungry. That means if data is siloed and stays on smartphones, you would imagine that you cannot build a global AI, but we have a solution for that as well. When it comes to privacy, you might think about anonymization or obfuscation with techniques like differential privacy, but they come in the way of creating a full-fledged machine learning. And encryption is probably the best way to achieve privacy, but that interferes with machine learning as well. So two techniques have emerged over the last couple of years. One is called federated learning from Google, and the second is called split learning from our group at MIT. And the idea is that while maintaining privacy of what happens on a smartphone, so if you're doing questionnaires or using the sensors for diagnostics and so on, how can you keep the data on the smartphone, symptom checkers, assessments, monitoring of individual? You can keep all the data local and never release the raw data to the server, but be able to create global machine learning algorithms. And so please come and take a look at our website or join our movement as we use SafePaths AI to share wisdom, not raw data, and without creating a surveillance system, without creating a big brother system, how we can create a global AI. We are very excited about bringing these solutions to you. So please ping us as we continue to work with this. So to conclude, PathCheck is really here to combine the manual contact tracing that has empathy, that has efficiency, it has proven benchmarks, and digital contact tracing, which is great, but it's not proven yet. It has automation, it has privacy, but they haven't merged very well with manual contact tracing. We think PathCheck can bring both these worlds together, and we have some of the smartest people on the team, but we invite you to join this open innovation platform in terms of the code base, in terms of the think tank, as well as for implementation, where pilot testing and releasing is going on. We are very intentional. As we go to your website, the apps you download are only in the preview version, and we are confidentially doing pilots with some of our partners and exposing APIs and working with public health. And only when we are very sure that we have solved the pieces of the puzzle would we go out. We will do testing, we'll do piloting first, and only when they're ready, we will announce that we are live in certain jurisdictions. So the reason why we're being so careful is we think public health is it's not like releasing, a social media app or a delivery app or something like that. We think this is a very important issue for us, and we're working with our partners before we say that we're releasing these apps and dashboards in the public domain. You're welcome to download the preview version on our website. So you'll realize that to tame this pandemic, we need choreography by governments and businesses. But they start choreographing, it becomes a surveillance state. So what individuals and communities need are privacy-preserving tools on the devices and solutions they already have, such as smartphones. And if they can coordinate amongst themselves, we can think of this not as a natural disaster where government and businesses come top down and help the society, but in case of epidemics and pandemics, the society can coordinate amongst themselves and help the government. And that's where the manual contact tracing, which is top down, and digital contact tracing, which is bottom up, can come together. So in the short run, PathCheck is here to solve the public health challenge. We are also working on restarting economy. In the long run, we want to build resilient societies. So please join us as we on this journey to augment manual contact tracing operations with citizen-facing apps and citizen-facing solutions that can combine many of the proximity technologies, such as GPS, Bluetooth, Wi-Fi, QR codes, and so on, as well as cutting-edge methods in analytics and machine learning. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Ramesh. It's exactly because of the polarizing point of view that you describe here that I'm so excited to bring on our special guest today, who clearly has a very strong point of view. Tomás Pueyo is the author of Hammer and the Dance, which is a series of articles about coronavirus that has garnered over 60 million views to date. So Tomas, if you're there, would you like to kick this off?
I know that. Thank you for having me. Looking forward to chatting with you about this topic.
So Thomas, welcome to our webinar. And I've been writing about this topic for some time, and it's being received very positively. Tell us a little about yourself and why you wrote The Hammer and the Dance, and how do you see things going forward?
Sounds good. I'm a VP of growth at an online company called Course Hero. It's a company that has that works in education technology. We help students study by enabling them to share educational content with each other. And I lead a big part of the business there. And I've spent the last 10 years in Silicon Valley, mostly working on product and growth. And that's going to be relevant to what we're going to discuss later. And then in parallel, like many other people, I looked at coronavirus data as it was emerging in February. And I just usually for the last few years, I've spent most of my evenings analyzing data and writing content on Medium. And it just happens that I focused on coronavirus starting in February, and what I posted became very, very viral. I've kept analyzing data since about the coronavirus and posting. And I had a reasonable strong opinion on contact tracing applications around a month and a half ago. That comes a lot from my analysis of coronavirus, but also from my experience growing online products.
Yeah. So maybe talk a little bit about why you wrote Hammer and the Dance, and what was the viewpoint? It was one of the earliest articles in this space. Yeah. What was running through your head, and why did you have to come out and make that statement?
It's fun that The Hammer and the Dance is the one that is most quoted because it was not the most popular, but I think the name is memorable. And so people remember it more. But the first article was Why You Must Act Now. That one was published on March 10th. And that one got, I think, around 40 million views. And that one was just for friends that asked me, hey, can you put together all your analysis that you're posting on Facebook every day so that I can forward that to my friends in Paris specifically. So I wrote it, but it struck a chord globally. And I want to interpret that article as the one that rang the alarm for a lot of people. And then I saw that the reaction of some countries was swift. Argentina, for example, within 2 days applied and was very aggressive and closed the country. France and Spain took a few more days, like the 15th, but then UK and many others didn't know exactly what to do. So that's where I decided to write The Hammer and the Dance, to really, really clearly say, hey, if you don't do anything, this is going to happen. If you just mitigate to reduce the initial wave, this is going to want to happen. And then your only solution really to really crush the curve and to optimize your ROI is the Hammer and the Dance. Right now, we have no idea what to do. You need to crush the caseload so that you can give some breathing room to the healthcare system, but more importantly, buy yourself some time to figure out how to dance, how to handle the economy after opening up without having a heavy caseload.
Definitely. So some people call it flattening the curve, but Hammer and Dance really stuck because it was a very obvious kind of message that you may have a hammer now, but it'll allow you to reduce the caseload and manage the economy in the dance mode.
That's right. And so there's actually an important, you mentioned flattening the curve. There's a very important nuance between these two. Flattening the curve speaks to a broad goal, whereas the Hammer and the Dance is a very clear, specific solution. And it's something that people can do. And the big difference is that you can flatten the curve just to save the healthcare system, but remain in a high level caseload situation. That's what Sweden has been doing. And that is also the direction in which the US right now is going. And the Hammer and the Dance suggested being a bit more aggressive than that, really controlling the caseload and reopening the country without a heavy endemic situation of the virus.
So Wall Street Journal wrote an editorial yesterday, and it was very negative on the notion of shutting down. And they, for example, showed that in their editorial that although the economy has opened up, the number of cases are not going down. Are not going up either. In fact, if they look at the ratio of the number of tests to number of positive cases, their argument seems pretty, at least statistically, seems very valid. And they're making a case that actually shutting down was a wrong thing to do. Actually, the right thing to do was actually awareness of what things to be careful about, where should you use masks, and have a very selective shutdown of things like meat plants and large gatherings and so on. So are we going to rethink it? Do you think it was the right thing to do to shut down the whole system, or to do a very selective shutdown?
Yeah, you should definitely send me that opinion piece. I'm interested. I haven't read it. I haven't seen it. There's many different things to your question. One is what is actually happening in the US. The other one is what should we do now, and the other one is what should we have done at the time. I think there's a huge fallacy on, based on what we know today, we should have done this other thing, and that's not at all the way to think about it, right? The way to think about it is based on the available information at that point, what was the right decision? And so I can't comment on that because I haven't read the article. So let's comment on the other two questions. What is happening in the US right now, and what should we do right now? On the US, the caseload right now seems relatively stable, but you need to look at the details to really understand what's going on. And really it's stable because mostly New York is going down, and you have at least 20 states that are going up. And then some of them are still in the first wave. Some of them are already in the second wave. And so this is definitely not stopped. What happened with the hammer that was applied initially in many, many states is that it really substantially reduced the caseload. And many states decided that they just didn't want to continue doing that, and they started opening. Right. Some more aggressively than others. For example, Texas was very aggressive in reopening, and they have a huge caseload right now that's growing again. California was very aggressive, but was not successful at really containing the virus. And when you look at the detail, it's mostly the non-city areas. Kent, for example, the Kent County is having an outbreak right now. And so really what's happening is very much the ones who applied a heavy lockdown did stop the virus, and the ones that haven't or are opening it up again are seeing outbreaks again. And so I think it's a very, very hard to say that lockdowns don't work or shouldn't work. Two more things. One of them, based on what we know today, actually hammer and the dance works better for the economy in the long term. Mm-hmm. It's actually not, it's counterintuitive, so that's why politicians don't do it. But if you close your economy to control the cases, then people feel better about consuming and going out, and then your economy on the long term is better than having an endemic situation where people don't want to go out and consume in order to catch the virus.
Yeah. So we have a lot of viewers here from countries like Brazil and Egypt and India and so on, and these countries are going through an explosion right now. And even in the US, we used to have about 30,000 cases per day, and now we're down to 20,000. So I would not call that a hammer at all, right? It has not gone down even by a factor of 50%. So that's barely a hammer. So clearly the strategy of shutting down the economy, I would not call that a hammer-based approach at all. So the hammer hasn't worked. So what is your take? Like if you want to talk to countries like India and Brazil and Egypt, what would you do?
And every country is different, right? And so I would say the hammer and the dance was applied properly in many, many different countries, at least 40, 50, and it worked in those. And then in some cases it wasn't, and I would argue the US didn't really apply a hammer. There's, I think, states like Iowa that never even applied one. And the concept of the hammer and dance is really controlling. Once you control the caseload and you know how to reopen, then you do that, but they didn't do that. Right. So the US really didn't apply the hammer and dance, and that's why they have the result they have. It is different for other countries. And Brazil and India are very good examples because they are in the extreme opposites. Brazil just didn't do anything. And so now we're seeing what we're seeing because of that. And we're not even seeing half of it, because usually what happens is the countries that don't believe in stopping the virus also don't test. And so we don't really know what's going on in Brazil. Something happened very similar in Tanzania. So Tanzania and Kenya are a good control, because one took this very seriously and the other one didn't. And so, and it looks like the situation in Kenya is actually not as good as it should with the hammer and the dance that applied. And Tanzania like looks better, but the remotes, the reports on the field are that people are like dying on the streets in Tanzania. India is a very good example, because it suffered a massive lockdown early on, and the curve was slightly curbed but never stopped, and now they're reopening it. And so the key there is the hammer on the dance is useful when you can apply a hammer that's successful and you can dance, but not all countries can. And that's one of the things that we learned over the last few months. And if we take, and the example of India is actually similar to Peru, or somewhat a bit less Argentina, even Kenya. So understanding what happened there is valuable to understand what the breakage points were and how to solve them. There's very little detail, actually, very little data on India. And so it's very, very hard to figure out. What I've read and how I compare that to what happened in other countries is that usually a hammer and dance works especially well in wealthier countries that can afford to have a lot of people staying home for a long period of time. And for those who make less money, to pay them to stay at home. That's what we saw in the US with an unemployment compensation benefits. In India, that was not the case. Most people could not be reached to pay them. So they have to go out to work. That is especially true in poorer areas, who also, by the way, don't have fridges, for example, so they cannot stay at home without going out to the market for weeks on end. And then on top of that, because usually they're poorer, they tend to be also denser. More people working in the same area, more people per household. So you end up having outbreaks in very high concentration areas. They could be slums, they can be other parts, but it's when there's a lot of people concentrated in a small place with a lot of people per household, where they have to go out to work or to buy food in high concentration areas like markets, and they catch the virus there, and then they spread it back into their communities. So what like the overall theme that we see in these developing countries, it looks like, I haven't confirmed this, is that the hammer and the dance broadly works for many areas, except for these huge concentrations of cases, outbreaks, and those need a different approach.
Fascinating. I'm sure we're going to see a great article from you on that. So let's switch to kind of digital contact tracing. It's a phrase we hate, because what we're doing is actually not digital contact tracing. There's no tracing whatsoever. It's privacy preserving and empowering an individual. But Oxford Oxford updated their paper on originally they said 56% of the population needs it to move to containment of bringing the R naught below 1. But now they're saying actually even 10-20% penetration can also help in other ways. And that's still with an assumption of using Bluetooth. So 56% Bluetooth penetration is same as 31% GPS-based penetration, because the square of 56 is 31. So with just 31% of the population having a GPS-based contact tracing solution, we can eliminate social distancing, even using of masks, and absolutely any shutdown of economy. And it's still possible to bring the R naught below 1, even without a significant manual contact tracing apparatus in that place. So it's a pretty impressive piece of work, and also very strong hypothesis. What's your take on that?
I haven't read the paper and I need to read it, so I can only comment based on the numbers that you mentioned. I think as a rule of thumb, you want to reduce the contact transmission rate below 1, right? And so where is it today? What percentage of that gets it below 1? The reports that I saw in Europe is that it's between 2.5 and 3.5 for the R naught. And so if you want to get that to an R below 1, you need to decrease that by 60, 70% ish, right? So when I hear something that 30% is enough, that's something that's counterintuitive, right? It would help for sure, but it sounds counterintuitive that it would be the only thing needed.
Just to clarify, Thomas, it's 56% when it's a Bluetooth-based solution because both people need to have it at the same time. But GPS scales linearly. Bluetooth only squares as a square of the two, and so GPS gets much more benefit in the beginning than Bluetooth. So that's why it's 31%. But otherwise, it's 56%.
Still, I hear you. What I mean is, what you're saying with 56 gets you to 31 with the square, which makes sense to me. And so that means that 56 really what it reduces at most is 31% of the R.
That's right.
And so that's the thing that I'm saying. 30% of the R is not enough.
Mm-hmm.
It sounds like 60, 70% is what's needed in Europe. So it sounds counterintuitive.
But more importantly, you don't need anything else to bring the R naught down.
That's what I'm saying.
The reason I say it is in countries like Brazil and Egypt and so on, it's difficult to imagine setting up a multi-thousand people, call center CRM system for manual contact tracing that's efficient and well-trained and privacy preserving and so on. So is a digital solution worth exploring?
So, and I'll go to a question in a second. I think what I'm saying is even like that 31 is just not enough. It is not enough. If you are 33.5 and R naught and you reduce that by 30%, that gets you what to 2.5, like still not enough. And then you made several other themes around the manual versus digital, and the 56. So let me tackle them all. 56 is not quite having the app, right? Is having the app and having set it up and having it on all the time. And having the pairing and the actual tracing figured out. And when you get infected, actually uploading that to the system so that the contacts are traced, and the authorities know about this, and that all these contacts are quarantined and or isolated. And so, and my specialty, right, is I mentioned is in growth, and so it's user adoption is a huge part for me. And for 56% of the population to do all of that, like you need an adoption of something like 80% probably, and there is nothing in the world that gets you an 80% adoption rate, right? And I think that the best in class were in Singapore and Iceland, where everybody trusts the government, right? And even there, they were able to have 20 to 40% of the population download these apps, forget about using them. And so that's my main concern. That going digital only, like the penetration there of people actually using it the way you need to is going to be so low that the square of that is not going to give you a dramatic contribution to the contact tracing need. It doesn't mean that it doesn't help, but it's a low contribution.
Yeah.
And then I can answer the manual part of this, but it sounds like you wanted to react, so please go for it.
Yeah, no, go ahead. I mean, the question really here on this forum is people are trying to make decisions on should they spend, if they have X dollars, should most of that be spent on manual? Should that be spent mostly on digital, or some fraction of that goes to manual and digital? And given these countries, it looks like you'll write a fascinating article on this. Yeah. What would be your guidance?
Yeah, I have not seen a 100% digital solution anywhere, right? So what I've seen is at most is both of them working well. And when I've gone into the detail, a lot of what people say is manual is important or manual is good enough. And it really depends on the specifics. So we can talk about countries like South Korea or Singapore or Taiwan, or also what's happening, for example, in California, which I know relatively well. So let's take a specific example. When I was talking with contact tracers here in California, what they say is right now, manual is 100%. We don't need anything else because it's quite easy. Because right now, I just have 2 contacts on average per case. And that's easy because most people are just locked down. And so it's as easy as, what have you done the last two weeks? Nothing, I've stayed home. Okay, who do you live with? Okay, these like my wife and my son. Okay, all right, boom, done. Right. And that's also why actually the contact tracing operation is extremely fast right now in California. And I've heard the same thing in Massachusetts. And broadly speaking, my guess is it is true in many of the cases, especially the ones that have lockdowns in the US. They believe that the number of cases of contacts to be traced is going to grow to 7 once the lockdowns loosen up. In a country like I think I don't remember which one in East Asia, it was between 22 I think and 40 cases. And so when you get to 20s into 20s or 40s, that's when it starts becoming a bit more a bit harder. But one of the other things that we've learned over the last few months is that the two things. One of them is super spreaders are concentrate a lot of the cases, right? So and the other one is in what situations these get spread. So let's talk about both of these. The vast majority of the cases are either a super spreader or in the family. The family is easy to trace. And so really what we're talking about when we're saying contact tracing is super spreader events. And that's where digital could be substantially enhanced. When you look at super spreader events and you look at the detail of how these things have been spread, they are things like prisons, meatpacking plants, care homes, choirs, rehab centers, right? And so all of these, which are in confined areas where people spend a lot of time together, talking, singing, touching each other. And so that is what we need to trace. And so the tracing of these events is the hard piece that manually, right? But in many cases, it's doable. Like for example, if it's in a work environment, like a meatpacking plant, it's easy because you know everybody who's in that meatpacking plant. So you go and you test everybody. Like in a prison, it's easy. You test everybody. In a choir, you know everybody. You test everybody. In a workplace environment, you test everybody, right? And so it's like what you end up having is the small subset of super spreader events when you don't actually know the entire group that was there. And at that point, I think what could be relevant is a contact tracing digital app that forces everybody to download it and use it to go in. That I think could be a tremendously useful. And then at that point, you can also use a QR code if you want instead, or whatever. But I think that is where digital could be substantially enhancing manual.
That's a very valid point, and I think that's something we think about at PathCheck. But I think it's a very valid point that the super spreader is what we should target. Yeah. You know, people you are in contact with, that's easy to deal with, and you don't need fancy technology.
That's right.
To do that.
And I think one of the things that I like how to think about this is, at the end of the day, what you need for this to work is coercion for mass adoption of a specific community, right? And what we're saying is we don't want that coercion to come from the government. And I think, okay, that's fine. But then if you have it as you can only, if you want to come into this event, you need to have this app, that is also coercion, right? But you're willingly taking it in. And as long as within a community, you have the coercion to be downloading and using an app like this, then for that community, the digital tracing can work.
Yes, fascinating. Let's take some questions from the audience, and for that, I'll hand it over to Dipti.
Thank you, Ramesh. And thank you, Janine, for being a lovely host. And thank you, Thomas. That's quite interesting, the discussion that you guys are having on famous hammer and dance here. And Thomas, you had an interesting perspective on how Sweden has famously approached it very differently from everybody else. Just to sum it up a little bit, the hammer and the dance, the key takeaways there were that the hardest in the terms of economy is the hammer, and but the hardest to pull off is the dance, as you say, right? And now we're entering the next phase in most economies, and the dance, the fluid space, as we say it, where some countries are starting to reopen and where we all need to be prepared and kind of need mechanisms to navigate well. And we heard in discussions as well in some countries that, the hammer really didn't work. Like, for instance, in India, it didn't really work, for instance. So we clearly, we do not have an ability to make an informed, accurate economic trade-off for this because we don't understand it yet. And at the same time, the US has been ripped apart in part because of the economic disparities, the economic cost, and the physical and the health cost of this virus that is being disproportionately borne by the many minority communities. And we have the institutions and governments that are wanting to make the decisions that they can live with because of the risks, according to them, that the economic modeling has shown it will be okay for them. So we believe here at Safe Paths that what we really need here is the vision. We need the practice of a community. We need the practice of cooperation, a coalition building, of understanding of how to hold each other and how to heal and transform. And what we're here creating is a new normal that is, fair, just, and equitable. And just wanted to mention that, I watched one of the videos of WHO recently on June 8th. And Dr. Tedros from WHO announced again on June 8th that contact tracing remains an essential element of response to COVID-19. And WHO is also convening an online consultation next week for COVID-19 contact tracing, where they say that the comprehensive approach of digital contact tracing tools would offer the opportunity to trace larger number of contacts in shorter period of time and also provide real-time picture of the spread of the virus. So the questions we are raising here from our community right now here are exactly how can we be confident that the decision-making paradigm of going back to normal and restarting the economy is contact tracing, manual or digital, in tandem with enough testing, play a role in adopting our way back? Or is it the herd immunity which is the right way back? So on that note, I'll just take the first question, which actually comes from Shirish, who says, maybe to you, Thomas, what should India do? Should it continue to do the lockdown or open the economy?
Yeah. I don't know. And I don't know because you can only propose a solution when you understand the problem. And I don't understand the problem. I have a hypothesis on what the problem is. But it's not confirmed. And as a result, I can't suggest anything. I know that I was working with a team at Harvard, actually, that looked a little bit into what was happening in India. And one of the key conclusions is that there was just not enough data. And so there's a world where politicians, even the ones that are very proficient and are managing well, they just don't have enough data to make the right decisions. So they just need to guess. And my guess is that's probably where Modi is right now. I understand that if the caseload has not been stopped, the country needs to reopen the economy because lockdowns are extremely expensive. I obviously worry because given the population of India, if there's a massive epidemic there, it's going to be bad for the world, bad for India and bad for the world. But unfortunately, I cannot recommend solutions right now.
All right, thank you. I mean, clearly this is a very data-driven pandemic, as we all know it, and really need data to kind of make decisions. And that's why maybe also digital contact tracing and digital solutions are really important. But on that note, I mean, you've been very closely related to higher education, I know, and maybe the question that I would have directly to you on that context is, when we think of reopening of schools and universities, and when making decisions about campus reopenings, for instance, what are the data points that are most important? And do you think that contact tracing could play a role there as well?
Yeah, so first on the second, I'll answer these questions in order. Campuses are unfortunately perfect for the coronavirus, right? You have a lot of people, high concentration, they are hanging out together in closed environments with a lot of people for a long period of time, whether that's the classroom or the dorm or a party. Or hooking up, and so and then on top of that, they are mixing with each other, right? It's like I am going to be 1 hour in this classroom with 30 people, and I'm going to catch the virus, and then next hour I'm going to go to this other classroom where I'm going to spread it to other people in a few days, and then I'm going to go to the dorm where I'm going to spread it to a few more people. And so the likelihood that an outbreak in a campus runs wild is high. Campus people know this and they want to limit a lot that, and so there's ways you can do it, right? Obviously contact tracing is, I think, one of these where you could have a good tracking. If everybody's using it and everybody can even the data of using it, you can have a good sense of all the other people that were in contact with a student. But we could be in a situation where there's so many of these people, right? Oh, if you're in campus of 10,000 people and just one person or two people, by the time they were noticed, they have infected 200 people, right? And oh, okay, who did these 200 people infect in the meantime, right? So there's a high potential for massive wide spread. So a couple of things there. One of them, there's some ways to reduce it, right? Masks and things like that definitely would help. There are things like, for example, you can avoid people talking in class. Instead, they write their answers, right? So that there's much less talking, and make sure the professor is farther away from the students. Like there's a few ways things that can be done. You can also make sure that some of the classes that don't work online are done offline, right? So for example, the band probably needs to be playing together, but they can play in the outdoors. So there you go. Whereas a CS class, maybe you can keep it in the dorm. So there's ways to reduce it. Contact tracing, again, being one of them. Testing, massive testing on an ongoing basis is another one that could be helpful to really catch an outbreak early on. But overall, I think it sounds to me like it's going to be very hard to pull that off successfully, and without a substantial percentage of the experience being online, and with reducing some of the core parts of that experience, such as the parties, right? So I am reluctant. From another perspective, colleges and universities really depend. Many of them depend on the money that they make in the fall with enrollment. So most of them will have a misalignment of incentives, where what's right for them might not be what's right for students, and many might still go forward and open their campuses even if students.
If I can ask a follow-up question to that, Thomas, Dipti, very important point about campuses. A lot of times answers come down to whether there's enough data, looking back or looking forward. So what do you think are the right mechanisms for anybody? Campus is a good example. What kind of data should they start thinking about collecting now so that it will become a self-learning system and move forward? Any suggestions on that?
Yeah, I have a couple. I think the crucial piece here is early alert system, like knowing what's happening as soon as it's happening, right? And there's a couple of ways to know this based on what I've seen in the research. One of them is sewage testing. Apparently, you can catch these even before people go to the hospital. You can catch this the prevalence in sewage, and so there's a world where if you do that well, you can identify very quickly budding outbreak. And the other one is massive ongoing testing, right? The good thing about higher education, as you know, is that the marginal cost is very low. The margins of that are through the roof. Yeah. And so you can afford to have an ongoing massive testing of everybody, whereas most other parts of the economy, it's not affordable. Yeah. And so if you test everybody every few days, there you go. You also catch the virus relatively early. So I think there's a few ways we can do it for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, that's very true. I mean, Dipti, you might be the company that Thomas mentioned, BioBot, is something that came out of my class. Mariana Manus, who's an awesome entrepreneur. She's PhD from MIT. She's the one who's working on BioBot and sewage-based coronavirus testing. If I can ask one more question, Dipti, here. If we believe in this incremental cost, like, right now the tests are about $100. The expectation they might come down to $10 or $15, right? Why not think about a digital vaccine, which is a smartphone? A smartphone is going to cost $100. It has a value for a couple of years, not just for that week of the testing. And with that, we can have a massive deployment. It'll transform economy because everybody will be digital. Everybody will have a smartphone. Even a country like India spent more than $100 billion. That is well more than $100 per person on economic stimulus. Don't you think there is a time to think? I mean, we're looking at the stock of companies like Zoom and others go through go through the roof. But don't you think if you are really a data, aficionado, that this is the time for countries to not think purely in the biological terms, but in digital terms, and just say everybody gets a $100 phone, and anything to do with the virus is zero rated. That means there's no cost to use an app that's for coronavirus, but everything else, of course, you have to pay the data plans. And it'll be an extremely data-driven solution.
Yeah.
And PathCheck, we're all about privacy preserving. So we have ways to create a global AI while maintaining complete privacy.
Yeah. What I love about this idea is the impact on the economy of the pandemic is so big that it suddenly opens up solutions like the one that you're mentioning that would be unthinkable before. It might be actually cost effective to do something like that. For that to be specifically effective for the pandemic, you would need perfect enforcement, right? Like you get this as long as it's constantly on right now. And so I'm putting myself in the shoes of the person that lives with 7 other family members in the outskirts of Mumbai and doesn't have a fridge, and say, okay, yeah, give me that phone, and then I'm going to leave it home, and I'm going to work regardless, and I'm going to buy in the market because I cannot live without the fridge, without the food, right? Or without working. And so I think that's where in the realities of the day-to-day is where these things break up. But that's still, like, there's a world where doing that, even outside of the pandemic, might be beneficial for the economy in the long term.
Yeah, let's take some other questions.
Yeah. Thank you so much. I mean, that was a great discussion, I have to say, and thanks, Ramesh, for pitching in. Maybe, I mean, being mindful of the time, I just have one question, and that comes overall from our community in general to you, Thomas. And maybe that's the breaking news we are hoping to get here. What would you want to share? What is the topic and the focus of your next article? And maybe you take away some ideas from this talk here now.
Can you say, as you heard, I couldn't hear the question. Can you repeat that?
Yeah, I just said that, I mean, after this talk, maybe you have some new ideas for your next article. And would you want to share some topics on the talk, on the article that you would write next, for instance?
So, yeah, the two that I've had in mind, where one is around the second wave and how to handle that. So how to properly dance, right? And the other one that I've had in mind and I've started exploring is an article specifically for the developing countries that can't, where the hammer and dance doesn't work. I think there's a piece of information that I haven't written. I think that could be relevant. It might not be a full-fledged article, but it's in the specific details of the real use case where digital contact tracing is superior to manual, which is very specifically in these super spreader events where we don't know by default the group of people that gathered. And so that can be an interesting point to make.
Oh, great. Thank you so much. I mean, that was really amazing what the thoughts that you shared with us today, and just being mindful of the time, I think I'll just give it forward to Janine now for closing.
Well, thank you everyone for this incredibly exciting discussion. Actually, I think it's very exciting to see some of the words that all of us have been reading by Thomas over the past few months actually come to life in this actual discussion. So I appreciate this very much. Thank you all who made this happen. As always, please follow Safe Paths on all the social channels. And thanks very much, and hope to see you all next week.
Thank you. And thank you, Thomas.
Thank you.
Thank you.